Right, okay, huge kudos to all of those here and in the other sessions throughout the day and making it to the final sessions here. One of the most important ones really, this is about modern and relevant cooperation and the whole theme of the event, the spirit of cooperation. So we're here to interrogate and understand some of these new models that are forming and how they're relevant to today, and what better person to do that than a journalist, but not only that, a brilliant journalist, head of Co-op News editor. It's Rebecca Harvey.
Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you very much, and well done, everybody, for coming to this one of the final sessions of what has been an absolutely fascinating weekend. It's been invigorating, it's been inspiring, and it has been quite provocative as well. So as Rose mentioned, I'm with Co-op News. So if you don't know Co-op News, it's the magazine about and for the global cooperative movement. It started off as a broadsheet newspaper, and it's been going for over 150 years now. We're a multi-stakeholder co-op, so our members are individuals and organisations both in the UK and internationally. At Co-op News, we have the absolute privilege to research, to write, to listen to, and to share stories about the most amazing co-ops. And I'm delighted to introduce like a panel today of some co-ops that I've heard of, some co-ops that I've sort of heard of, and some that are completely new to me. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to them all. So with us we have Philip Clayton, who is the co-founder of Bright Future Co-operative. We have Nicola Lewis, who is a founding member of the Intermediary Co-op. We have Sean Fensom, who is the Secretary of the Cooperative Network Infrastructure, and we have Claire Stocks, who is a Director of Chorlton Bike Delivery. So I hope we'll have a fantastic hour listening to their stories. And first up, we're going to hear from Philip Clayton, who will tell us more about what Bright Future is, what it does, and how they're solving problems for individuals, for communities, and in helping the cooperative economy as well.
Thank you. Hey, it's really amazing to be here. There are around 20 million victims of modern-day slavery in the world today, 100,000 of those in the UK. Majority of those are not identified. Last year, there were only 17,000 victims of modern slavery identified in the UK. I've been working with victims, I'm going to switch my terminology now to say survivors of modern-day slavery for the last 13 years, helping protect and support them to recover from what's happened to them. I was just telling colleagues here that I went out of university into retail banking, which is slightly different to what I've spent the last 10 years doing, and realized that I actually wanted to live my life helping people and changing people's lives. And so I'm 100%, if not more, like passionate about seeing lives fully restored and helping people to regain their identity and find their purpose. And so I went out of retail banking into the charity sector and set up one of the first safe houses for male victims of labour exploitation in the UK. Labour exploitation is still the fastest growing type of exploitation in the world. Every product you buy, you're wearing, we've sampled, will have some form of slavery in its supply chain. It is nigh on impossible to get away from modern slavery in our modern world today. One of the things I spend a lot of my time doing at the moment is working with companies and co-ops and B Corps, as we heard controversially in a session earlier, helping identify the risks of modern-day slavery in people's supply chains and helping mitigate those risks. In the AI session earlier, we heard about how technology and AI can help. One of the things I work now is with tech companies, helping them to help bring workers closer to each other in the supply chain and closer to the brands and companies that have no idea really what's happening in a Bangladeshi factory with their workers. And so I'm 100% passionate about this. I now work in preventing and moved away from protecting. I started my own company called Align, and we help organizations align their values with their actions. And one of the main things that I love doing is connecting socially driven organizations with other organizations who care about the same things. So that might be charities with businesses, or businesses with charities, or co-ops, or B corporations, or other entities. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Bright Future Co-op came about, and why we went with a co-op model and not a business, or not a charity, or not a community interest company. I remember I was sat in a safe house, and I was waiting the arrival of a 55-year-old man who was being brought by the police from 6 hours away. He'd been rescued from a situation of modern-day slavery where the police had raided a farm and removed him, and I was sat, my job at that point was to welcome him and to make him feel safe and secure and to begin to support him to move forward with his life. And I was sat there, and I remember he came through the door and he had a black bin liner full of really, the only possessions he had, they were clothes that hadn't been washed for a very long time. And he came up and he came into the room, and I opened the door, and I showed him into his room, and I said, I'll just give you a few minutes. And he went and sat down, and I kind of went downstairs, and I heard him crying. And so I went back upstairs, and I went into the room, and I sat down on the bed next to him, and I said, what's wrong? How can I help? And he just said, like in his broken English, I've never had this. And we learned that he'd never had his own room, he'd never had his own bed, he'd never had his own space that he could call his, that he could be free in. And fast forward 2 years, still supporting this gentleman, and he came back from a job interview where, again, he'd been rejected. And he said, I'm going to go down the road and get that job again. And I said, what job are you going to get? And he said, oh, that man that offered me that job, he said, I can just help him and he'll give me some money. And he was going to go back into a situation of exploitation, taking cash in hand money, because he couldn't get a job. And this was one story of tens of men that I'd worked with who worked so hard to overcome what happened to them, to only hit a barrier when trying to get into employment of job interviews and having the right clothing and the right approach and writing CVs and digitally engaging with the DWP was terrible. And that overwhelmed them, and they ended up going back to old coping mechanisms. And so I started going around in networking events in rooms like this and standing up at any Q&A and asking a completely question not related to Q&A and said, does anybody here want to employ survivors of modern slavery? Are there any businesses here that can help? And that's one day I got connected with the Co-op group, and they wanted to help. And so we started a small pilot of helping one individual work in a Co-op store. And then I remember getting a phone call from a guy called Paul Gerard, who's now director in the Co-op group, and he said, Phil, I understand you're doing something with victims of modern slavery. Tell me what would be the gold standard of what you're doing and how we could help you accelerate that. And I thought it was like, some angel or something, like you're a charity and you desperately need funding, and somebody goes, okay, we're going to help you. That's unheard of. And what we did was we started creating this model of connecting businesses with survivors. And so we started this with one charity and one business. The charity was Causeway and the business was the Co-op. And then we took that to another business and another charity who supported victims. And then we grew it to 20 charities and 20 businesses that all were helping identify survivors and then connect them into permanent positions. And then we ran out of money. And so we said, well, how do we make this sustainable and scalable? And how do people continue to buy into the vision and the purpose, and we don't lose the DNA of that? And so we created a steering group of businesses and charities to connect to each other and say, well, what's the best way to move this forward? And they decided that the cooperative model was the best way to maintain the values of what we'd built, cooperation between businesses and charities, where you had senior HR managers sitting alongside support workers. And that cooperation, that sharing, that collaboration that was the strength of what we were doing. And so we opted to set up a co-op so the businesses and charities could be equal members together, and they could share the vision and share the passion. The businesses paid for it all, but so now we have a situation where we've got businesses who pay to fund the co-op and charities who offer who bring survivors in. So you have a matching service, essentially, where survivors are connected with businesses, and in the middle is the co-op that offers the service that connects all the members together towards the same goal and the same vision of seeing survivors enter permanent employment so they can rebuild their lives. So that's how we got to the co-op. That's what it does. That's why we chose it. And the impact we're seeing now is incredible. Since 2017, we've seen on average more than between 1 and 2 people enter permanent employment every single month. So we now have a system which is helping people, which is giving people a pathway into employment. And there's lots of detail around that we've worked out in terms of safeguarding and support with the charities and businesses collaborating together. But essentially, it has created this fast track where people had had their lives stolen, ripped away from them, torn and abused in the most horrific manner that they could be. And now their lives are being restored through the cooperative model.
Thanks so much, Phil. I mean, it's an absolutely mind-boggling story, and what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. I'm just curious about the work placement. So you've mentioned the co-op group. Who else is involved, whether that's co-ops or other businesses?
Yeah, so you have organisations like Currys, place a lot of placements. We have 2 other co-ops. East England Co-op have just signed up. We have West Midlands Co-op as well. And then we have businesses like Balfour Beatty. So there's a range of different industries. So it covers across the care sector and construction and retail as well. So yeah, there's a range of different brands that are in there.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we'll definitely hear more from Philip later. But for now, what I'd like to do is welcome to the stage Nicola Lewis, who, as we mentioned, is the founding member of the Intermediary Co-op. So the Intermediary Co-op is brand new to me. So I remember when Layla first got in touch with me about facilitating this. This sounds amazing. So I can't wait to hear more about this. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for giving us time and space to speak. We'll use this high-tech clicker here. Oh, no. Oh, it's Chorlton mic delivery on next, I think. Sorry, obviously I'm not here for my technical skills. I'll just start talking anyway, because I don't want to hold people up today. I'm one of the founder members of a cooperative called the Intermediary Co-operative. Intermediaries are essentially communication specialists, and we are from backgrounds such as speech and language therapy, psychology, mental health nurses, and SEN teachers. And essentially, an intermediary is a communication specialist who goes into the courts and assists children and vulnerable adults to give their evidence in family and criminal court trials. So that's our lovely logo. And this is me just telling you what an intermediary is. We assist vulnerable people to understand the evidence against them and what's happening in court, and also to have their say in courts and tribunals. And I was quite inspired by the last session that was up here about disability, and Gregory saying that what people need to do is to take an approach to treat each person equitably. And that's essentially what we're about in the courts. We ensure that we look at the person who's in front of us, we assess their communication strengths and weaknesses, we write a report for the court, and we explain how that person needs to be communicated with in order to understand the case against them and to give their evidence. We're independent, so we're that little blue person in the middle. We work for the courts, and the idea is we're not somebody's mum or sister who's sitting with them. We're there to ensure that the lawyers can do their job and that people get fair access to justice. I thought I'd give you a couple of examples of work that we've done. A colleague of mine asked me to talk about Danny, who was an autistic defendant that she worked with. He had been charged with sending images to a 14-year-old, and he was saying that he was not guilty, but the evidence against him was quite overwhelming. When the intermediary got involved, it turned out the problem was the language. As far as Danny was concerned, he wasn't guilty because he hadn't done anything wrong. But when she changed the language and when she said to him, "Did you do it?" he said, "Yes, I did it." So essentially he had not understood the inference behind guilty. He thought that it meant that he hadn't understood the language in court. I'm working with a mum with learning disabilities at the moment who's in prison. It's about harm that occurred to her child, and she has a learning disability, and she also just doesn't understand the language of the lawyers. She's pleaded guilty in the criminal courts, and I don't think she understands what she's pleaded guilty to. I'm not working with her in the criminal courts yet, but I hope I will do. I'm working with her in the family court, and she had thought that she was agreeing to a placement order for her child, which she thought meant the child would be placed with her when she leaves prison. In fact, a placement order is the first step on the road to adoption. So in fact, not understanding the language being used was quite critical in that situation. Bobby, a dyslexic father of 4, the wife was a heroin addict, and he was left one day with the 4 children when she was not able to stay in the home anymore. He didn't have the confidence to say to social workers that he didn't understand what they were asking him to do. He couldn't keep calendar appointments because he didn't have a system for recording, and he was at risk of losing all 4 of his children. With intermediary support through the court, he actually got to keep all 4 of his children living with him, and he was given the right support from then on with the social workers, understanding his communication needs. And I just put John, the 86-year-old defendant there, a guy who was accused of historic sexual abuse. There were, I think, 60 witnesses who wanted to give evidence against him, but he was at risk of not being able to participate due to his age and his infirmity. So it was really important to those victims to be able to have that day in court, and that was something that we were able to facilitate, his communication with the lawyers and being able to understand what was being asked of him. So what does the intermediary cooperative do? We came about when the government decided to contract out intermediary services. There were 50 of us who worked independently with very strong ethical values, and we're all from a communication background. And we considered that when the work was contracted out, there may just be large providers such as, am I allowed to name them? Well, we all know who large providers are who take government contracts. We were worried it would be dumbed down and they would end up training people for one day, sending them out, saying, here's an intermediary, but vulnerable people wouldn't have the voice and wouldn't be able to say, well, this isn't massively helping. So 50 of us got together and said, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to bid for a contract. How are we going to do it? Thankfully, with a bit of help from the Co-operatives UK organisation, we worked out how to form. We worked out how to put together a bid for the contract. And we couldn't believe it, we actually got one. So in April of last year, we were awarded one of 3 government contracts to provide intermediary services. We also do off-contract work because there are vulnerable people in all areas in the justice system, suspect interviews, for example, parole board hearings where people are having to explain why they should be given early release, probation meetings, and your large inquiries such as Grenfell. All those areas intermediaries aren't really known about. And obviously there are going to be people who might have suffered traumatic incidents, who have mental health needs, who may need some support going through those environments. So our main unique selling point is we are communication specialists, but in our model within the co-op, we follow those main core values, and we want to work in a socially responsible way. We are obviously not for profit, and we're one member, one vote. We help each other. Before, when we were independents, we all went out. You could listen to some pretty horrific stuff, and it was quite hard sometimes to, well, we couldn't share anything because it's all confidential. So now we're a group of 50 people. We have put together support for our own mental health, because if you don't sharpen the saw, obviously, there's a lot of attrition in the profession. How did we become a co-op? Well, to be honest, we sat there, 50 of us, saying, how are we going to do this? We've got no money. We're not professionals. We don't know how to run a business. And we want to be able to scale something, but nobody's going to lend us any money because we've got no contract and, you know, we've got no cash. So we crowdfunded ourselves, and we decided that the best model was the cooperative model. Once we had a look at all the different options out there, we thought we would have a stronger voice if we gathered together. Individuals can have a contract, but we understood that we could do more as a cooperative. We would have a stronger voice for the vulnerable people that we work with, and we could push forward the agenda more about fair access to justice. So one of our main principles is obviously equity. It's not an equal playing field for everyone in court, and we feel it's a fundamental in a civilized society that everyone is enabled to have access to justice. We support each other, as I said, and we really, really wanted to create something of value. And what I've experienced being here in this conference is the amazing values that people have and the things of value that people are doing. So I'm really proud that we went down the cooperative route, and it's been amazing meeting quite a few of you. The impact on the members, all of the above. I won't read that out for you, but it's collaboration, and I'm sure it's at the heart of everything that everyone in this room does. It's something that was new to us because as individuals we hadn't had that. And we have a seat at the table with the Ministry of Justice. We meet with them once a month. We do try and push forward the agenda for vulnerable people and issues with fair access to justice. And that's my next slide, really, impact on vulnerable people and justice professionals. You know, it's really about understanding that there's not a generic autistic person, there's not a generic learning disability person, and that's something which a lot of justice professionals seem to think. I've worked with an autistic person, I've got a 7-year-old child, I know how to do this. Everyone is different, and everyone deserves to be treated as an individual and have their individual needs met. Our broader impact, well, I'd like to think that we are building as a cooperative and we're looking at social value and environmental commitment. We work nationwide, but we try and match intermediaries within their geographical location, unlike some of the other companies. We're looking to share information with justice professionals about the work of intermediaries because I'm sure, well, I doubt many of you knew we even existed, and that is unfortunately still the case within the justice system. There are people who just don't understand our role as communication specialists. And really, we're trying to be a voice for the voiceless, the person who won't be heard otherwise in court, who'll just go along and agree because they're embarrassed to say they don't understand, really giving people a chance to represent themselves. And my final slide really is to say that we hope to be an innovative cooperative. We've got lots of ideas about how we want to grow. We would like to be able to work so that we have vulnerable people who could be part of our service eventually. But we're new and we're learning. We've been in existence for a year, and anyone who has any ideas about how we can develop and how we can grow, or any offers of support about how to be a good cooperative, we would really welcome any help and support. And we're delighted to be part of this amazing community.
Nicola, thank you. I've got so many questions. I'm going to collar you later, I think. But first of all, I mean, you said there's 50 of you in the cooperative. So are you based all around the UK?
We are, yes. We're all over the UK. Everyone is a self-employed contractor, and the co-op is basically a hub. We don't have an office. We have a piece of IT that delivers people matched to vulnerable people in different courts, and we have to provide a heck of a lot of management information for the Ministry of Justice, which, thank goodness, our IT system does. So we're based, we're very agile in terms of that, and yes, anywhere within England and Wales and some parts of Scotland.
Fantastic. Okay, and my other question was, how do you actually find out about co-ops? Because one thing we keep hearing at these conferences is that, you know, co-ops are the best kept secret. People should know about co-ops, but they don't. So how did you come across the co-op model?
Yeah, well, I started off thinking we can't exit this market because vulnerable people deserve to have a real voice. And initially, I looked at whether or not a business could be set up, but government margins are incredibly tight. And actually, everyone who wanted to be a part of this organisation didn't want it to be for profit and actually wanted it to have some social value. So a quick look at Mr. Google, found Co-operatives UK, started to explore the concept. It took us a while to understand really what it was, and Irina and lots of Petra and lots of people talked to us and helped us to get on the road. And the support was massive. The Hive helped us. And actually, it's still an ongoing journey, and we're very new, but it is the model that works incredibly well for us, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about replication later, because I think that could be quite interesting. And but for now, we're going to move on to our next speaker. And Claire, I'm going to jump this on you. I know you were supposed to be going last. We're going to switch it around a bit, if that's okay. So Claire is a director of Chorlton Bike Deliveries.
Thanks. Hopefully Steve on the tech is... yes, he is. Brilliant. Hang on, Steve. We'll just go back there. Are we going back, Steve? Oh, no, we're on a rolling thing. Sorry. Right. Yeah, I'm Claire. I'm one of the 5 founder members of Chorlton Bikes, and we're a community bike delivery service. So we deliver stuff by bikes, so if that's obvious. But much, much more than that. We essentially say that we use bikes to create social change. And we started as a response to COVID and the lockdown in March 2020. Basically, there was 5 of us. We didn't really know each other, but we had a sort of shared idea of helping local people keep in touch with their local shops and not use online shopping. We started with 1 cargo bike and 2 trailers, And as it turned out, a lot of kind of matching skills and contacts, but we didn't know that at the time. And we've now accidentally grown, with the help of Co-ops UK, into a successful cooperative. Indeed, Sean, sitting here, is one of our members. And all of our members share our values, which are about getting cars off the street, supporting local people and businesses, and creating living wage jobs. So what do? Well, we have a really strong community arm led by our volunteer riders. So we take surplus food from local supermarkets to food banks. We recycle household items by bike. We upcycle bikes for refugees. We've got a bike library, so you can try out a local bike, see if it's for you. And we also offer now a trishaw scheme, which is how we enable older people to stay active by taking them out on a piloted ride on our trishaw, and other things too. But that activity is supported by 3 means of funding. So we get grant funding. We have a lot of volunteers, and they put in volunteer hours, and then some commercial work. And the commercial work is largely with either our local traders in Chorlton or built around an offer with the NHS. We pick up stuff from our local GPs, and we also service local hospitals. And we're proud to be a living wage employer, and we pay a living wage to our riders for our commercial deliveries, and also our 2 part-time coordinators, Toby and Jack, who is here today. Nice one, Jack. So a year into that, we founded as a cooperative, and that was with the help of Co-ops UK and the Hive. And we offer huge thanks for that. And the reason for that was partly because of actual inspiration. In Chorlton, we have an amazing cooperative called the Unicorn Grocery, and they were our inspiration, really. So since that, I'm just going to show you now a little video for a bit more of a flavour about what we do that we took last year for our AGM. Thanks, Steve.
Fantastic relationship with the volunteer riders. We love working with them, and we would love to work with them more in the future on different projects.
You can turn it back up, Steve. There's no more of that. That's me. That's Debbie, another one of our founder members, and basically we like to have fun as well. None of us really knew what we were doing when we set out, but since that video, loads of positive things have happened, and the biggest news has been that we finally moved into a new premises. So when we started out, that's the pictures on the left, we didn't have a home, but we gradually grew over that first year to have all of these bikes. That was just operating out of our back gardens and our kitchen living rooms. And so earlier this year, we were lucky enough to find a vacant premises in our local shopping precinct that's slated to be knocked down. So we got our hands on this shop, and all of our members kind of pitched in. It was really scary, kind of, right, I've got to sign a lease. I've never been in charge of a building before. But all of our members pitched in to clean and then paint and fit out. That's a bit of artwork on the wall. This hub, that was the upstairs, that's actually it cleaned up. It was full of junk. And that's now being used as an office by one of our members. And this was the outside, as you can see, looking really shabby. But a local sign designer offered to make us that beautiful sign sort of at cost. And this was us opening in April just this year. And I just think like that is a little mini story of like cooperative spirit coming together to do this thing that none of us had done. So I thought I'd finish by just summing up what I think we've learned in our 3 years, and I'm going to finish with 2 key asks. So the first one is the power of bikes. So our scheme attracts a lot of attention and allows a conversation about reducing carbon emissions from driving. But it does that without having to say it in those words. It's not preachy, it's not a lecture. It allows us to connect with people through positive, active opportunities, and allows people to see what is possible for real in action, not theory. And we can say to people, would you like to try this? Not a preachy, you should do this. And we can offer a nursery slope to people to try things out on their doorstep with a bit of fun thrown in. Secondly, this is, I think, is a story of the power of community collective action. And the current nature and climate crisis and all the things that need to change can seem really daunting, especially when we've got a government that's cutting back on its commitments to funding for cycling, green energy, trains, all the things we're going to need. But schemes like ours enable people to come together around a collective vision and interest. And it might not be at a scale that solves the global climate crisis, but it does have a bigger impact in a small community. Because people actually do want change, but they don't want to do it on their own because it feels pointless. So if you can give people collective schemes where they can come together around shared interests, it feels really powerful, and it creates momentum and appetite for more change. And then thirdly, we are a shop window for change, and our bikes attract so much attention, from short chats to GP receptionists or small business owners looking for a greener way. We've now got people knocking on our door in that premises, and the interest has skyrocketed since we've literally got a shop window. And there are so many more things that we can now do with a physical space, which many businesses perhaps take for granted, but we took 18 months to just find a place like this. And in less than a year, we'll be homeless again, because this is just a short-term lease. So this is a call out for anyone who's interested in supporting us or buddying up to find new premises in Manchester, because this is also an issue for the wider cargo bike industry. We've tried partnering with a commercial company on shared space, but even commercial companies can't get their hands on locations to expand in Manchester because property owners prefer income from rents or retail. So finally, on to my 2 asks. The first one, probably no surprise, we've got to make infrastructure accessible to bikes, and bikes that deliver commercial deliveries, but also family transport. We've got the B network coming in Greater Manchester, and so we will be getting better bike lanes and better public transport. But in the meantime, existing infrastructure, we get things like bollards that just prevent people on bikes and bigger wheelchairs and buggies using them. So let's help get rid of these things from our cities. The second thing I might ask is to the cooperative movement to make cooperative governance more accessible, especially for entry-level groups like ours. Thanks to help from Cooperatives UK via the Hive process and our sister cooperative Unicorn, we did found as a limited company as a simplest option, and we adopted the template articles as a multi-stakeholder cooperative, and we used sociocracy to make our day-to-day decisions. And that really got us going, and we are forever grateful. But effectively, we're a largely volunteer-led cooperative, and people don't want to devote time to meetings and complicated decision-making. Many members are just happy to support what we do. Articles are complicated. You know, a third of directors are meant to stand down every year. Resolutions and general meetings sound grand and aimed at bigger cooperatives, whereas they're not really used. Our cooperatives are just about people getting together day to day, small decisions and doing stuff. And a bank account, it was a nightmare getting a bank account. So my proposal to Cooperatives to UK is, please could we have a really basic governance starter pack for community level schemes, pick up and go, including a bank account. We tried to get a bank account through the cooperative bank. Guess what? That wasn't an option. Could it become one? Could the two things become closer together? So that's my suggestion. Co-ops UK is a brilliant organisation. We are ever grateful. But perhaps it's got a greater role to play in supporting collaborative community level action by making things simpler at that community level. And hopefully this suggestion will be taken in the constructive cooperative spirit in which it's intended. Thank you.
Claire, thank you so much. So for those who don't know, Chorlton is in South Manchester. So it's about well, depends how fast you cycle, about 20 minutes for me on a bike. And it's interesting because I live just outside Chorlton, and I see the Chorlton bike deliveries go up and down. It's fantastic. So my question, Claire, is, so you mentioned you're a multi-stakeholder co-op. Who are the members?
The members are made up of individuals, but then we also have local businesses. So our cheesemonger is a big user of our services, but also a member. Okay. I mean, I was interested to come today to hear about the different models on offer, and very interested perhaps in going down the sort of community share route and finding a different entity wrapper that would enable us to do that more, especially with our hunt for a premises. Maybe that could be wrapped in. But as it stands at the moment, yeah, mainly the multi-stakeholders that aren't individuals are local businesses.
Okay, brilliant. And how far do you cycle? Like, what's your range?
We say it's about a 3-mile radius from around Chorlton. Our NHS deliveries are slightly bigger. But we are interested, again, in working with others to perhaps expand. We have got city centre runs, so we kind of see ourselves as the shape being a sort of segment of the pie in South Manchester. And there are now other bigger operators doing stuff in Manchester, like Zedify and Urbit, and Amazon have got cargo bikes out, you might have seen. So, when we see this infrastructure that's going in, more deliveries could happen, not by vans parking on the pavement and idling their engines, but by bikes. It's actually quicker to deliver by bike than it is by a van, and there is a lot of commercial interest in it, but we need to get kind of hubs that they can operate out of, and the property market in Manchester is really hard for that.
It is, it's really hard, really hard. Thank you so much, though. That was absolutely fascinating. So I'm very aware we've only got about 18 minutes left now. So, no, it's fine. Everyone's got too much to say. That's fine. Sean, your turn. So Sean is among many different hats, is the Secretary of the Cooperative Network Infrastructure.
Yes. Hi. I'm involved in a number of co-ops, as Rebecca just said, but the one that takes up most of my time now is Cooperative Network Infrastructure, which is a different kind of co-op in the sense that we're actually applying the cooperative model in a different way. So, we're in a different space from most co-ops in terms of digital infrastructure. And we're not a workers' co-op or a consumer co-op, but we're actually using the co-op model to do some different things, and that's why we call ourselves a cooperative neutral host, and I hope to explain something about what that's about. So as I say, we are involved in the process of sharing and developing, operating, and to some extent owning digital infrastructure. That means fibre in ducts. It means whole or parts of data centers where the servers go that are connected by the fibers, and to an increasing extent, the radio equipment for things like 5G networks. But what actually we're finding, I work with a group of consultants, and we've taken this model, the thin layer model we sometimes call it, and we're finding applications with the construction of heat networks or electric vehicle charging, or perhaps most ambitiously, the creation of local energy markets where you're using the model to reduce friction in establishing transactions between energy producers and consumers. And, this comes to the question as, you know, why are we doing this? You may ask that question a bit later when you see who our members are. And I think in essence, what cooperative network infrastructure is about is it's less about the notion of democratic ownership of things, and it's much more about reducing the friction to collaboration and to cooperation. And I suppose what the vision there is that if you think about it, if we were to stand any chance of saving the planet, we really do need to do cooperation at scale. And that means not just individuals who are members of cooperatives, it means involving private businesses, it means involving all of the arms of the state, as well as the third sector. So I'm going to quickly explain how the thin layer model works. If you look at digital infrastructure, then essentially a really good way of looking at it is to analyze it in terms of layers. They're technical layers, but they also form a value chain. So it's fairly obvious what's going on there. You've got the service layer, which is the services such as broadband internet access that are offered to consumers. The electronics that moves data from one place to another, irrespective of what that data contains. And then the physical passive infrastructure underneath, the fiber and the ducting and so on. You can make a much the same analysis for the railways, for example. You've got the journeys that you buy at the service layer. You've got the trains and the signalling at the active layer. And then the passive layer is the rails and the tunnels and the viaducts and so forth. The way that the internet industry works and the digital infrastructure is exploited commercially, a dominant model is the vertically integrated model, for example, Virgin Media, where one company owns the infrastructure and also provides the services. Another very common model, and one which is very dominant in this country, is one where there is one owner, one dominant owner of the passive infrastructure and the active infrastructure, but you've got competition at the service layer. And interestingly enough, there's even room for a co-op to come in there. Mid-Counties, your co-op broadband does exactly this. And it does it very well. But it doesn't yet penetrate down into the lower layers in order to capture more of the value chain. And that would be, in my opinion, a good move to try and get the co-op model into more of the value chain. When you go out into Europe, you will find models which are actually more open to small businesses, to cooperatives, to come in and capture more of the value chain. So, for example, in Stockholm, which really was doing this stuff before most places in the world, there is a fibre network which is owned by a subsidiary of the council, and then all of the rest of the stack, as we call it, of the other layers, is left open to the market, which could include public sector operators as well. What we did with the thin layer model is we took that notion of breaking up the monopoly, if you like, one step further. Because where we started in Tameside, here in Greater Manchester, we had bits of network that were being constructed by public sector organisations to service their own needs. And we came up with the idea of using a cooperative to sew those bits of passive infrastructure together into a single passive network, if you like, so that we could then offer it up to people who would want to use that, to organisations that would want to use that, much the same as in Stockholm, but without having a single monolithic owner of the bottom layer. So we're using the cooperative as a way to sew those bits together. And the key to that, the reason that works, is because a cooperative is neutral. And it's neutral because it's one member, one vote. No one can take it over. People talk about asset locks. You know, in a sense, this is a neutrality lock. So using that model, we built some 250 kilometers now of neutral spine infrastructure with sections of data centers at key points in the network. Here in Greater Manchester, particularly in Tameside, but also in the city of Manchester, which is a member of the cooperative, in Blackpool, and also more recently down on the south coast, where we've been working with councils such as Brighton and Hove City Council. And these are the font's gone a bit wrong there over the, that's the conversion to PowerPoint, never mind. These are the members that we've got of the cooperative so far. And as you can see, there's a mix there of local authorities, parts of the NHS, alongside some really quite major telecoms operators like Virgin Media, for example, or City Fibre, and smaller challenger ISPs, the more agile, innovative ISPs, like, for example, I'm not sure where it is on there, Telcon here in Manchester is a very forward-moving ISP. And the key to that membership, or a key aspect of that membership, is the fact that the public bodies themselves actually participate in the co-op. This isn't some sort of state intervention or subsidy in order to get broadband to places that otherwise wouldn't get it. The state is actually involved in it as a player in the market. So an example of what we're also able to do by extending beyond that model where the public bodies have built their own bits of network is that we're beginning to leverage collaboration from the private sector members as well. So for a recent demand that we had here in Greater Manchester, we needed to connect a CNI data center with a public sector data center on the other side of the conurbation. We were able, using a bit of CNI fibre, some fibre that's been installed in ducting in the tramway. One of our members, the EU Networks, a transnational corporation that's a member of the cooperative, connected to the main peering point in the centre of Manchester, that's where the internet is, there in the centre of Manchester, that's where all the networks come together. Then on another one of our members, another transnational member of the cooperative, Zayo, American owned, but a member of the cooperative, up to the final section, which we're building ourselves, CNI, in order to connect to the remote data center. Yeah, and that's good because it's the last slide. So using that, what we're able to do using this model is to mediate multiple relations between our members, those who've got and those who want, without lots of complicated contracts. Trying to build that last thing using ordinary contract arrangements would have been a nightmare. Using the governance of the cooperative instead, it's quite simple, and we were able to present it as one single contract. And that's it.
Thank you. Sean, I was really, really interested to see some of the local councils on your members list. So how's that going? How did you get the councils to agree to this?
Well, I mean, the initiative came originally from the council in Tameside. I was working with the council in Tameside, and we developed this concept of the thin layer cooperative because Tameside was building something that would not only be useful for its own use in terms of connecting up council buildings, but they realised that this could be a real boost for the local economy and provide local businesses with access to services that otherwise they wouldn't get. And so they saw the value of actually engaging in the cooperative. And then from that point, other councils then said, well, we'll join as well then. And I think that's very different from you know, I hear a lot of talk about getting councils to procure from cooperatives, increasing the social value component of procurements and these sorts of things. That's all great, but there is this other way of engaging with them, saying, you're part of the market, you know, you're part of this industry, you don't need to stand aside from it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much, all of you. So we've got about 5 minutes left, but one quick question before we open it up for questions from the floor is how can we encourage more replication of these examples? I mean, Claire, you've already talked about actually the need to have a kind of off-the-shelf, this is how you set up a small community cooperative. And I know, Nicola, what about you? Because you found it through Google. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, it wasn't just through Google, actually. It was a sort of person that was trying to help me to set up a business. She said, this isn't going to work. Have you thought of the cooperative model? And that's when I started Googling, well, how would that work and what would it be? In terms of replication, I don't know how many other organisations like us would be looking to bid for a government contract. But to my mind, that was the exciting thing, that we've got a contract with central government and they like us, they want us to grow. They would like more people like us who are ethical in our approach. And so really I'd like to try and work out how we could offer guidance and how we could look at replicating our success in bidding for a contract, because we're being totally encouraged to expand and to grow. They would like us to occupy the larger space in the market. At the moment we're quite teeny tiny, but yeah.
Philip, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think there's a real big education piece, and I think it's generational. It's not just a one-hit kind of wonder. I think definitely getting the cooperative model, mindset, value system taught and trained in various different spaces, higher education, secondary, academies. I think there's a program there. Yeah.
And I was just going to add, I mean, the volunteer sector, you know, there's the Manchester service, every borough has kind of got a volunteer service that helps support volunteer groups. And the one in Manchester, you know, there's a brilliant kind of set of resources about if you're going to constitute, what's a CIC, what's a charity. Cooperatives weren't represented in that material, for instance. And, you know, I don't know why, because I think for community groups, I'm involved in lots of them, and they actually offer something really good. And I think if the co-op could kind of fold in just a couple of simple extra things, like the bank account is a key thing, that would be massive.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have we got any questions? Jeevan?
Thank you. Really interesting. Really interesting. Claire, I'm interested in terms of the bike model. Who pays for the service? Is it the shop or is it the consumer? And also, do you have any plans to pay all of your riders? Because I think running by volunteers may not be sustainable. And then, Sean, I was interested on your point about the network. I think it's a similar question. So, who do you effectively pay the network owners an access price of some kind in order to use their network? So, where's the money flowing for your service?
Claire and Sean.
First question was about who pays, so it depends. So if we take on a new trader, we'll discuss with them, we'll agree a fee, and that's, you know, we're so small that we have an idea of pricing, but ultimately it's a kind of one-to-one relationship, and we will work it up based on what we think is going to make the business work. And a lot of the time we do that to try something out, to see if there's a customer base, and then we'll work on a sort of more commercial model. In terms of the riders, I think we are really a community scheme at our heart, and I think a lot of the funding that we get is more from those sort of behaviour change projects and seeking to show what a role bikes can play. I think if we were going more down the commercial route, we would adopt a different model. A lot of our riders are volunteers because they want to volunteer, and then they can volunteer for paid shifts if they want to. So our members are mainly our riders. Someone asked earlier, and I didn't say that. So yeah, we've kind of evolved in response to what's occurred around us rather than sitting down and writing a business plan. And that's maybe why the cooperative resources don't quite fit us. Yeah.
So the most expensive bit of a fibre network is the ducting in the ground. And that generally belongs to the local authorities or to some extent to Openreach. We put our fibre nearly on those maps you saw, that was CNI fibre in those ducts. So we've got approaching £1 million worth of assets now. And one of the ways that we finance that is there's some various legal innovations that we've been working with. There's a new concept we come up with called a cooperative right of use, where we actually sell a long-term lease on fibre. We've sold some to councils, but also to our commercial members, which then helps us finance the purchase of more fibre and the deployment of more fibre in other places.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for staying for this, one of the final sessions, and thank you very much to all of our panellists. We'll be sticking around if there are any more questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for more, but please join me in thanking all of our four guests. Thanks.